I mean, why stop at James Franklin? You might as well make some more coaching changes if the job is not going to get done.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Thank you to the everydayers out there. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. Did this team give up against Ohio State? I have some final takeaways that I want to share from the Buckeyes' 38-14 win over Penn State. But the more important news is the head coaching search and why it's about to get busy here. And did one of those candidates give a resounding interview in person on Saturday? But before any of that, we're going to talk about at Penn State why they should make some more midseason coaching changes here after this performance against Ohio State. Friendly reminder to let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Some of you might argue for Jim Knowles. I understand your reasoning, but I see a coach, I see a coordinator that's trying to make changes, trying to make adjustments. It's just not working, and maybe that's not good enough. But what I watched on Saturday against Ohio State, I saw an offensive coordinator that had no answers, that was not making any changes, and it was a true tale of two halves. And that was because Andy Kotelnicki did not make any adjustments whatsoever. He didn't make any good adjustments. It felt like they were running the same 5 plays. And with that being said, I don't think it's in Penn State's best interest, or even Andy Kotelnicki's best interest, for him to keep calling plays for the rest of the season. And I do not say that lightly. I do not like calling for somebody else's job. I don't think it's right. But it might be for the best at the end of the day. Because Kotelnicki, just whether it was he was defeated, Ohio State goes up by a bunch of points, and I didn't think too much to go away from what was working, but it's all of that stacked on top of each other. So let's break it down here, because there are a few reasons why Kotelnicki for the most part, it was the fact that Penn State just completely scrapped what was working successfully in the first half. You were able to move the football against Ohio State. You actually got explosive plays out of Nicholas Singleton multiple times for the first time all season. And you go away from that entirely. I get it. When you're trailing, it is difficult to run the football because it's time consuming. You don't have the leverage to put together a 15-play, 75-yard drive. But it's not like Penn State was down 20 points instantaneously. They completely changed course the second they went down 24-14. It felt like Andy Kotelnicki, it seemed like he had to get a response immediately. No, try to construct one of those 10, 12-play drives again, because it worked. It worked. And then, okay, you're right back in it. It's not that it was 17-14 at halftime and then 24-14. You drive down the field, even if it consumes some time, you make that a one-score game again, potentially, if you're doing what works. And it's up to Andy Kotelnicki. He has complete and total autonomy here. Yes, he's answering to Terry Smith, and that's another part of it here that I'm going to get to. But he has more control. You see the creativity. It's a little out of control to an extent. But he wasn't, that's what I mean. He's opting to go for all the creativity rather than the simplicity. You were getting successful yards on the ground with 6 or 7 offensive linemen. Ohio State did not have an answer for that. When it came to the more simpler passing concepts, it was working. Why didn't you go back to those? That's one reason. The next reason is he has control over the personnel. And for whatever reason, Kotelnicki will not play Tyseer Denmark and Kobe Howard. And then this relates to another reason. So that is direct defiance of what Terry Smith had said. So Terry Smith is the interim head coach. He said that he makes all of the decisions. Yes, the offensive and defensive coordinators have more autonomy than maybe they should at the end of the day. That's a different conversation. But you answer to Terry Smith. And if Terry Smith says, I think we should get Tyseer Denmark and Kobe Howard, a lot more playing time. And I wouldn't argue that you need to flip the depth chart upside down and that Denmark and Howard should be starting. But I made sure that, hey, we're on the same page here. And I asked Terry this past week, and I said, who is in charge of the personnel decisions on a drive-by-drive basis? He said, that's up to the coordinators, plain and simple. So Kotelnicki, it's not Stan Drayton. It's not Marcus Hagans. It wasn't James Franklin. And it's not Terry Smith this time. It's on Kotelnicki and Knowles to put in and rotate those respective players. So that means that Kotelnicki has been putting in Nicholas Singleton when it does not make sense to. When Kaytron Allen should be getting all of the work as the feature running back. And you notice how much success they've had when they switch to that. Kobe Howard and Tyser Denmark still aren't getting enough playing time. Denmark had 1 snap and Kobe Howard had 7 or 8 snaps. And he had 1 reception, which actually went for the longest passing play. He had the highest average of 26 yards. I am not saying that they need 100% of the snaps, but they certainly need more than just 1 or more than 10. Both of them should be getting 15 to 20. They should be in a frequent rotation. I understand wanting to use your veterans. They are more proven. They probably comprehend the playbook a little better just because they played college football for longer. I understand, but Pena and Hudson, other than Devontae Ross, you are not getting anything out of the wide receivers. You need to fix that rotation, and you defied Terry Smith by not playing him in this game when he said on the record that we should. So Kotelnicki is not doing things to help set Penn State up for success. And he's going against what the head coach is saying. And it doesn't make any sense. He's opting for Liam Clifford as a Wildcat quarterback, which cool, creativity, awesome. But I don't like how it's being utilized. It's setting up Penn State for failure rather than success. You use that to start out a drive, to start building momentum if you haven't had any. But the second, that's another thing. It's a disservice to Penn State's offense at this point, because what frustrates me the most, I don't mind the creativity. I think it's neat when it works. However, when you get Ethan Grunkemeyer, who is in his second start in a hostile environment against a top 3 defense conservatively, he gets an explosive play and picks up and moves the sticks on 3rd down, and you opt to go with a Clifford Wildcat quarterback play. You are dooming your young quarterback by not letting him build momentum or rhythm. I've been calling for Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen Wildcat packages, or just get them on the football field at the same time, because your best 11 players include those 2 running backs at the same time on offense. We haven't seen that once this season. What gives? So if it falls on Andy Kotelnicki, you're not doing your job. And these things seem so simple. I try to say, hey, be a little humble here. I'm a podcast host trying to figure this all out. And the answers are so simple at the end of the day. I would give him one more chance. This is the last resort here if I'm Terry Smith. And Pat Kraft might not even want to wait that long. Who knows when this episode, based on when you're watching this episode, maybe changes happen. I don't know. But Andy Kotelnicki, if he doesn't make those changes against Indiana, whether it works or not, you have to make the changes. Because look at what happened when you made that change with Kaytron Allen. Instant success. Penn State's offense was that much more respectable and honestly would have saved James Franklin's job. Kaytron Allen plays that way and gets that workload against Oregon, UCLA, and Northwestern. Penn State at least wins 2 of those, and the season's not over. That's what these kinds of personnel changes can do. So Terry Smith needs to have a sit-down conversation with Kotelnicki and say, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you making these changes? And then you either make them against Indiana or Ty Howell needs to be calling plays. And honestly, that's why I say it's probably in the best interest of both Andy Kotelnicki and Penn State, because then Andy Kotelnicki can get a head start on his future employment, because who does it benefit at the end of the day? It doesn't benefit anybody. And Ty Howe gets a chance because I think he's an up-and-coming assistant coach. I think he can be a really good offensive coordinator. I've only heard resounding rave reviews about him as an offensive mind. But he misses out on that opportunity because now Kotelnicki is being too stubborn. Okay, how about something a little more positive? Because Penn State is targeting its next head coach, one of which has an interview and is going to be one of the elite hires if they are able to make this one. But they have other options if they don't go in this direction. So we're going to talk about that next here, coming up on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time College Football. We love it. We couldn't be more excited that it's here. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands. There's just nothing else like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel more like a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why you got to use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You can pull up Game Time, and in just a couple of taps, you'll see amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. And another great feature, if you've never been to a stadium, you've never been to a venue, there's no second guessing your tickets because you get your point of view ahead of time through Game Time. So you can see what your view is going to be like from any of the seats within that stadium or venue. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. That is promo code LOCKED. ONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Still to come on this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions, I'll give you my final takeaways from Penn State versus Ohio State about the team, right? The stuff that's focused in the present as opposed to what we're discussing with future plans at head coach. But we're going to talk about the interview that Penn State has lined up here in this segment. Things are getting busy. I wasn't kidding. And which candidates make the most sense at this point. Even the long shot candidates as well. So we'll discuss where things stand in the head coaching search for the Nittany Lions, starting with the guy that actually has an interview this week, and that is Brent Key, Georgia Tech head coach. Okay. So things are actually moving, or we have something tangible to go off of because it's a lot of speculation. It's a lot of what if. It's mutual interest. We've seen Curt Cignetti re-sign with Indiana. Nebraska gets Matt Rule to sign an extension. Okay, those were Curt Cignetti would have been a top candidate for Penn State. Matt Rule, I think he signed an extension because he knew that Penn State was going to go in a different direction, and why jeopardize what you have with Nebraska for the possibility that your alma mater is going to give you a call back. Because I'm sure there was mutual interest, but probably not the same by both sides. Just my 2 cents. There's interest here with Brent Key using his bye week at Georgia Tech to interview for the Penn State job, reported by Penn State's 24/7 site. And I mean, you can't go wrong with this hire for a variety of reasons. I'll explain my concerns here, but and it's minimal in comparison to what you're getting with Brent Key. So I would approve of this hire. My preference is still for Kalen DeBoer and Mike Elko. Logistics aside, I'm talking about, all things, with nothing considered, who is your top candidate? One of those two. But Brent Key is not too far behind there in terms of upside, in terms of what he's going to give you, something different than what James Franklin was giving. And that's really my biggest point of emphasis when looking at head coaching candidates, because I don't think Matt Rule or Manny Diaz, for example, give you a lot that's different from James Franklin. Brent Key has proven that he can win right away. I like that he gets back to the fundamentals of football. Physicality, toughness. He wants to teach that as his core tenets. And in the Big Ten, that is necessary. Just because Oregon and USC and Washington and UCLA, and I don't want to dismiss them because those two of those teams beat Penn State this season. And one of them, frankly, was a little more physical than Penn State. It was a back and forth game, right? It wasn't physicality alone. But I would like to see Penn State play with a chip on its shoulder again. And I think Brent Key would bring that with him, since that's such a point of emphasis for him personally, is playing tough football, running the football effectively. I mean, he's a former offensive lineman. He's been a run game coordinator. Here's what's important. He's a former assistant coach under Nick Saban. You can never have enough Nick Saban disciples running around college football. And Kirby Smart, Lane Kiffin, all these guys have succeeded. Kurt Signetti as well. And Brent Key is another one who coached for a few seasons under Nick Saban. So, and immediately gets that head coaching job with Georgia Tech, and he has shown progress. Okay, a little bit of a standstill at 7-6, but now at the time of this recording is undefeated and projected to go to the playoffs with Georgia Tech. Now, here's where it gets complicated. If you make the playoffs, is Penn State going to be patient? Is Penn State going to wait? And that applies to a lot of other coaches. Mike Elko, Brent Key in this instance, Elko, DeBoer. Those are names that all have mutual interest in the Penn State job. How big that interest is at the end of the day to be determined. But if Penn State is going to go in this direction, they need a contingency plan. These coaches have proven, for the most part, DeBoer and Elko respectively are long shots for a reason, but you see that Key, Georgia Tech, at least in recent memory, has not been a competitive football program, to say the least. And somebody that's done so much more with less and has turned them around. My biggest concerns at the end of the day, again, are minimal in comparison when you talk about what Key would do. Just an offensive-minded coach, physical, fits within the Big Ten. And I think of how he doesn't have a lot of recruiting ties, right? He's not from the Northeast. Is this his destination job? I don't know at the end of the day. And that's what a lot of people would say, including myself, about Brian Hartline. But if Penn State takes care of Brent Key and his family and the coaching staff around him, that's the whole point. If you give him the support, then this can work out at the end of the day. But you get a quick turnaround. Imagine if you gave Brent Key the necessary resources to build up a bigger, stronger program. That's the idea here, is that if Key can do this at Georgia Tech, what can he do at Penn State with the war chest that they have in the NIL transfer portal era? Because he's figured something out at the conference just below the Big Ten and the SEC, in the ACC. Now, another ACC coach that should get a lot of attention here. I've heard this name pop up quite a bit recently. Jeff Brohm. And I'll get to Brian Hartline in just a moment. Jeff Brohm, it's going to be the same situation, and I should have mentioned this with Brent Key. Key is an alum of Georgia Tech. That's going to be a tough sell, especially when he has no connections to the Northeast. Jeff Brom's been in the Big Ten. He coached at Purdue. He's an alum of Louisville. But the reason Penn State is so interested in Jeff Brohm, again, succeeding more with less at Louisville, at the ACC, but he's succeeded everywhere he's been. Western Kentucky, Purdue, and now Louisville. He is truly proven. Brent Key is still relatively a new head coach. If I had to prefer one of the two, honestly, Jeff Brohm, because he's been at the Big Ten. He was at Purdue, and he was upsetting top 5 teams. Michigan State, Iowa, Ohio State, at Purdue. So imagine what he could do with the support from Penn State. Again, Louisville alum, offensive-minded coach. You can see a common theme here with Penn State with who they're mostly targeting. Mike Elko, the exception, and Manny Diaz as well in this conversation. A lot of these other names are offensive-oriented. Brent Key, Jeff Brohm, Brian Hartline, Kalen DeBoer, all offensive-oriented, because you see Penn State wants to kind of right some of these wrongs over the past few seasons. And you would think, James Franklin with his background and quarterbacking and wide receivers, that he'd be an offensive-minded, offensive-leaning head coach, but that wasn't the case, especially after the COVID season. I digress from that. But Jeff Brohm, he's 4-4 against top 5 teams. He is 12-17 against top 10 teams. By comparison, James Franklin's record, 1-5 against top 5, 4-21 against top 10. And Jeff Brohm did this at Western Kentucky, Purdue. Well, he wasn't beating top 10 teams at Western Kentucky, but he did this at Purdue and Louisville. And I'll add this, he recently upset number 2 Miami at their house on a Friday night as a 10-point underdog as the Louisville head coach. Again, tough to get him away. That's what I've heard. It's tough to get him away from where he called home for a long time ago. There's still interest. Brian Hartline. Brian Hartline really gives you something truly different. I don't think Penn State can go wrong with any of these candidates. Brian Hartline, just what he would bring that even Jeff Brohm, Mike Elko, Kalen DeBoer don't have. And let me mention Brent Key as well. Hartline, young and up and coming future head coaching candidate, interviewed for the West Virginia job last year. So did Andy Kotelnicki, oddly enough. People might forget about that. But Hartline, what is so interesting about Hartline as a head coach is what he would bring in terms of player development, what he would bring in terms of recruiting, in terms of connections. Oh, what they're going to get, or do you think they're going to get every number 1 wide receiver in every single recruiting cycle? That's not what I'm trying to say, but what about the guy after that? Or the guy after that? Or the guy ranked after him? It would be a massive step up from where Penn State is. And then by proxy, you would get the quarterbacks to follow because you'd build this elite nucleus of wide receiver prospects. And then all you have to do, well, he hasn't been a full-time offensive coordinator for very long. How is he going to manage a major Division I program? How's he going to manage a major Big Ten program? Well, what was the answer for Dan Lanning? Marcus Freeman, Kirby Smart. They all had similar setups, similar situations, and look at what they're doing. I'm not saying that's the promise. That's the potential. It can happen with Brian Hartline. You got to build the right staff around him. Give him the right resources. So his shortcomings, maybe that's, game planning to an extent, putting a full comprehensive game plan together. Let him focus on player development, recruiting, and then build a staff around him that completes the whole setup. Because Brian Hartline is going to give you something that Penn State hasn't had in quite some time, if at all, in the James Franklin tenure, of a household NFL caliber, a former NFL player that has just shown that he can produce first-round pick after first-round pick after first-round pick. And I know Penn State has had success sending players off to the NFL, but not at the same consistency and the same rate at one position group. Every single year, there seems to be an Ohio State wide receiver taken in the first round. Bring that over to Penn State, why don't you? Okay, and then Mike Elko and Kalen DeBoer. Look, similar situation if Brent Key gets to the playoffs. What is Penn State's contingency plan? I like Mike Elko a ton and Kalen DeBoer for obvious reasons. They're succeeding in the SEC. It's going to be tough to pry them away from Alabama and Texas A&M respectively. Mike Elko in particular, though, does make a ton of sense. Ties to New Jersey. He's from there. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. He has those Northeast connections. He's a defensive-minded guy, which still is going to go over very well in the Big Ten, but Texas A&M is firing on all cylinders again. Mike Elko is a proven winner at the ACC, at the SEC level immediately. Give him the support. He'll turn everything around. He'll right every wrong. My argument here is that any of those hires that Penn State were to make, there's no wrong answer with any of them. It's just which one is most correct. So we'll see how it updates and unfolds from there. All right, final takeaways from this game against Ohio State, and one of which are the players just done? Did they quit? Because you can make the argument that Andy Kotelnicki did against Ohio State, but we'll talk about some final takeaways coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets. That's right, $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And that's to use on anything on FanDuel. NBA, NFL, college football, you name it. Again, if you're a new customer, you'll get $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Final takeaways, Penn State and Ohio State. And I know the head coaching search is so much more interesting, right? But there are games being played, and these are some of my takeaways. I mean, a lot of them have to do with, look, I mentioned them about Andy Kotelnicki. That's a huge takeaway about how the offense just looked abysmal from the first half to the second half. I want to talk about the players, and this isn't everybody. I think Terry Smith has done as incredible of a job as he has, trying to rally the troops, keep guys motivated, especially when a lot of them are seniors that they probably just want to get to the NFL, right? I understand. But there are select players that just have given up. I understand it, but I'm not condoning it. I don't think it's acceptable. Okay? But I commend Terry Smith for trying his best. There was energy. That's why I say select. I don't look at this team and it's like, okay, this player's not trying. This player's not trying. This player's not trying. Everybody knows. Okay. You see it. You watch the game and you see plays where you could give more effort, costly penalties, that type of thing. I understand it's still a reflection, for later on in your football career, whether you're playing somewhere else next year in college football or you're going off to the NFL. What can you do to maximize a season where everything's kind of a lost cause? I understand protecting your health. I get it. I really do. But there are just some plays where you gave up. You really gave up. So it's not systematic anymore. Because at times it did feel collectively, the whole team just gave up, just didn't have any fight. They looked and seemed defeated. Terry Smith is at least getting some players to buy back in. And I respect that. I do. Individual player performances, you saw a little bit of life in Nicholas Singleton, just getting back to some of his explosive plays. I want to point out two players in particular that definitely deserve a shout out. Okay, Katron Allen and Zach Wheatley, right, as veterans, but I'm talking about young up and coming players that had a significant impact on the game, for better or for worse. On offense, Ethan Grunkemeyer. I know he threw an interception in that game. He wasn't polished. He wasn't perfect. It's his second career start against a top 10 defense. Iowa's top 10. Ohio State, you have the argument that they're either number one or number two. But back-to-back road starts, I know there's a bye week wedged in there, and Ethan Grunkemeyer showing me progress. The ability to stand within the pocket, the ability to go through his progressions. He has veteran poise for somebody that's in year two, making his second career start against elite defenses in hostile road environments. More power to Grunkemeyer. That is a starting college football quarterback. If it's at Penn State, cool. If it's somewhere else, I get it because we don't know what the coaching is going to look like in time for Penn State. So, but Grunkemeyer, just the way that he carries himself, it's difficult because why isn't he was inaccurate at times, and that's unacceptable for a former top 10 quarterback recruit. But I like seeing the things that are out of reach for a lot of young and up and coming quarterbacks. Again, that poise, going through your progressions, not being afraid to take a hit, to stand within the pocket, to ad lib a little bit. I mean, we saw some creativity to Houdini out of the pocket a couple of times and convert on that. Here we go. Another Penn State punt. Oh, Grunkemeyer extending the drive because he got a little creative. If Andy Kotelnicki had given some creativity to the passing concepts, well, maybe Grunkemeyer looks better. I put that a lot more on the coaching than I do Grunk. And the same thing, wide receivers, just not creating a ton of separation. So Grunk did make his mistakes for, a second year quarterback, but I like the step forward he took from Iowa to Ohio State, even though it wasn't the prettiest. it was good, it was positive, and give him some more comparable opponents to Penn State, and I think he'll look like, a pretty impressive QB. Chaz Coleman on the defensive side of things. I mean, Chaz Coleman, I hope that Penn State can keep him around, but go figure. Larry Johnson was seen and documented after the game talking to Chaz Coleman. Recruiting violation? I don't know. I'm going to throw it out there anyway as an accusation. But Chaz Coleman from the state of Ohio, showing that the Buckeyes shouldn't have overlooked him as much and shouldn't have let him leave the state of Ohio. Coleman, I made the argument, created 11 points. He manufactured 11 points for Penn State. Now, how does that make sense? He's a defensive end. Okay, for starters, Coleman, when they were in that goal to go situation, he was the one that disrupted the play and kept 4 points off the scoreboard because he hurried a pass from Julian Sayin. Julian Sayin had very few incompletions. He was 20 of 23. One of them was forced by Chaz Coleman because he hurried the pass. That keeps 4 points off the scoreboard in favor of Penn State. And then recovers a fumble. Now, whoever it was, Amari Campbell got a hit on the ball. Zachy Wheatley got a hit on the ball. Denai Dennis Sutton got a hit on the football on that play. But he was there. Everybody was looking around, and Chaz Coleman's first to pick it up and run towards the end zone. The awareness of a true freshman to find ball, see the ball, pick it up, and try to score with it. Again, Coleman, just mature beyond his years as a true freshman. This is someone that has not played a lot of defensive end. He was a basketball star. He was a dual sport athlete, and he looks like he's been playing defensive end. The game is just so seamless to him. I can only imagine what kind of player he's going to be when he adds the weight, because I think he's around, they say he's at 240. It's hard to see it. It doesn't really pass the eye test. He looks a little light in comparison, which is why he's not playing as much, because it is a liability for both Penn State defensively, but honestly, it's not. It's a disservice to Chaz Coleman to put him in situations against a 320-pound offensive tackle that is run blocking at him. You need to maximize Coleman's ability now, but not put him in danger. So Coleman, just a player that you do not want entering the transfer portal. It would not surprise me at the end of the day, given we don't know what Penn State's coaching staff is going to look like. Again, Deion Barnes, if he's still with the team as Penn State's defensive line coach, okay, you have something there. Maybe Coleman does stay, but that's a superstar that you want to build around. That is, he has Abdul Carter-like talent at defensive end. You want to build around that if you're Penn State. And overall, I mean, this team is what it is. They're lost. They're not that confident. They're missing talent in areas that they need. They're not adjusting to Jim Knowles' system. Andy Kotelnicki's play calling is good sometimes, and then it's really terrible other times. You have a backup quarterback in. Penn State could win maybe 1 or 2 more games on the schedule. They're not beating Indiana. I know that's a home game. Nebraska, I would like to sit here and say, yeah, that's a toss-up. Probably not. I would say it's safe to favor Nebraska by 4 or 5 points, maybe even a touchdown. That's still going to be, and probably maybe even more than that. But they can beat Michigan State. They can beat Rutgers. I think those games are absolutely winnable for this Penn State team. All dependent on which players are still available, right? As we sit here presently, if the composition of this team can give Nebraska a fight and can win those other 2 games, Indiana, probably going to look a lot similar to Ohio State. And then speaking of Ohio State, the thing that I just want to finish on, that's an Ohio State team that should be the clear-cut national title contender. Ryan Day potentially winning back-to-back national championships with a reloaded team, but first-time play caller in Brian Hartline. You change over defensive coordinators. You have a new starting quarterback, a new look offensive line, new backfield, new defense in the front 7, and man, they have not missed a beat, and they are fairly comparable to last year's team, and honestly, look better. I don't even think we've seen Ohio State play their best, most aggressive football just yet. Week 1 against Texas, you can only take so many things away. But now that this team has settled in, now that they've established their identity on both sides of the football, and you have somebody like Julian Sayin quarterbacking, this team's only going to get better. And they were winning 17-14. I could make the argument that Ohio State only tried for half of the third quarter, and look at how quickly things got out of hand for Penn State. Imagine what happens when they try for a full 4 quarters. They could have easily put up 50 points against this Penn State team. Not 50 in total, I mean 50 more. No, I'm over exaggerating, but you get my point. Is if they wanted to score, they could have scored more at will. They let off the gas for a majority of the game. Extremely telling. I don't know anybody else that's at it's Ohio State for me right now. Indiana's close, but it's Ohio State at the top and everybody else. There is that clear separation where I'm picking Ohio State to win a national championship at this given time. Penn State, they are what they are, but Ohio State, man, if they play a full 4 quarters at top level, at their best, at their peak, I don't know who's stopping them. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. I appreciate each and every one of you for stopping on by, checking out the show, checking out the channel. If you are new, become an everyday or subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around all your favorite Penn State sports teams. Talking football for better or for worse, talking wrestling for better or for better, hockey, basketball, recruiting, all of it is covered here on Locked On Nittany Lions.